All right, everybody, welcome in. We're going to give about 10 seconds or so to add a few more people, and I'll kick it over to Ray and Rob. All right, gentlemen, you can get started whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. If you're on the East Coast or everybody else, I guess, if you're on the East Coast, it's afternoon. So everybody else is morning. But thanks for giving up an hour of your day to spend with us talking about our latest iteration, edition of the parking structure cost outlook and construction budgeting. I'm Rob McConnell, one of the VPs and parking design and consulting principals at WGI. I have about, for those of you that don't know me, I have about 31 years of planning, designing, and maintaining parking structures all over the U.S. Ray?
I'm Raymond Smith, also with WGI. I've been here since 2001, and I'm a VP in the parking design and consulting group, and bring over 28 years, designing parking structures all over the country.
WGI, for those of you that may or may not be familiar with us, we're a multidiscipline engineering consulting firm with a transportation focus, and we have offices all over the place in the United States, gradually taking over the world here. So here's some examples. I'm not going to get into the details. The agenda for this hour-long, give or take, presentation is here. And if you've attended one of our presentations in the past, it's going to look pretty familiar. We've obviously updated the numbers for this year, and we've added a few little, new tidbits of information and images. So hopefully it's informational to you. We're going to first talk about how the cost outlook is calculated, how we apply it. I'm going to take a little deeper dive into what makes up garage construction cost. Ray's going to talk about soft cost, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about operations and maintenance. The WGI cost outlook goes back to our days as Carl Walker. Our first report on construction costs was put out in the end of 2003. And on the right there, you see what our latest one looks like. If you haven't managed to grab a copy of it, jump on our website and download it. It's a free download, so do that when you get a chance. Go ahead, Ray. For comparison, in our December 2003 outlook, the median cost for a garage parking structure space was a little over $11,000 a space and $35 a square foot. Man, those were the days when you could get them for that price. This year we're up to about 31,000, a little over 31,000, almost $31,400 per space, and just under $94 a square foot. That means that if you're a statistics nerd, that means that the price to construct essentially the same parking garage has increased 278% over the last 22 years, which is roughly annualized to about 4.75% every year. It's not quite linear, but Ray will share a graphic here on the next one.
Yeah, here's a little graph that kind of tells you how it's increased over time. As Rob said, it's usually been about that 4.75% growth, but we obviously went through some unique time there in the jump from 20 to 2001 and 2002 during the pandemic there. And between 2020 to 21 and 2021 to 22, we had those 15.8 and 8% jumps there. So a significant jump over that time frame, but it's kind of going back now, as we've seen traditionally, to kind of be on that 4% pace. We'll talk a little bit about how our cost article is created, and it goes back to our database that we've kept since 1990, and it's hundreds of projects all across the country, different sizes. So lots of data points, but the most important data points are where the garage is located, because we have to kind of create a location factor when we create the national average. So we have to know where the garage was built, what year it was built, how many parking spaces was it, the total square footage of the garage. We track efficiency and number of levels and what the structural system was, be it precast or cast in place, or steel sometimes. What was the delivery method? We track all of that. You'll find out later here, the building cost index at the time that garage was built was very important. We'll use that number to help bring the dollars forward to what it is today. And then the city index is very important because it tells us how that city in the United States relates to the national average. Here's just a little snapshot of 15 garages that live in our database, and they cover different systems. The size of the garage ranges. You'll see in this little snapshot, it ranges from 200 to 1,400 spaces over 11 states, one in Puerto Rico, and most of these garages are above grade. We take out the underground garages from our database when we do the national mean, because they're so unique and their cost is really escalate as you go deeper in the ground. Let's do a little deeper dive. One project that we'll look in particular is, kind of explain how we take the Montgomery College job that was built in 2014. How do we take that data and bring it and make it part of the national median? And we do that by taking the cost of that garage at Montgomery College when it was built and bid in 2014. It cost $23,275 for those 918 spaces, and for that 308,400 square foot, that's what it cost. So, and what I said earlier, it's very important to know what the ENR building cost index was at the time that project was bid in April of 2014, which was 53.57. So we take that ENR building cost index back in 2014 and we create, kind of the escalation factor. And by bringing it to today's dollars, we take the current ENR building cost index value for May of 2025. That's when we published the article. So at that time, the ENR's building cost index was, 8520.44. And so by taking that number divided by the original building cost index, we get that escalation factor. And so then when you escalate the cost of the garage in Montgomery College from when it was built back in 2014 and bring it forward to today's dollars, then that's where you see if that garage was built today in Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland, it would be $37.02 million to build that garage today. And that would average around $40,326 per space. Or if you're looking at it on a cost per square foot basis, that would be $120.04 per square foot. And that's just by multiplying our original numbers by this escalation factor. And the next thing we have to do is normalize it. That's how we create the national uh, normalized cost to be part of that national median. So we have to understand, well, the national average is 100. And so we look at the city cost index for in Baltimore, Maryland, which was the closest major city to Rockville, Maryland, where the garage was bid. And that had a city factor at the time it was built of 92.8. And you take that number and take 100 and divide it by that number, you'll get a location factor. Because since that's less than 100, you're going to factor up to normalize it by that 1.078 factor. And so when you do that, you'll get the normal national average for 2025. And that's one data point. And like I said, we've got hundreds and hundreds of data points. And we take all of those garages we've done since 1990, do this exact same thing to them, and then we recalculate the national median, and that's how we get 2025's national median cost to be 30,400 per space, or $93.85 per square foot.
So how do you use that number? So we've given you the national median 31,400, so how can you take that number and apply it to whatever project you're considering? And I was just going to kind of run you through an example of hypothetically, if you were going to build a garage in say Columbia, South Carolina, which is about an hour and a half down the road from me, where I sit in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the probably the least involved thing you could do is to take the number that we publish for Charlotte, because we do publish a number every year for Charlotte, and and use that, because Columbia is kind of near Charlotte in terms of the closest major city. Certainly the closest one that's on our list of cities in our article there. But that'll get you kind of close. But the cost of living in Charlotte's a little higher than Columbia. The cost of construction's a little higher. There's a little greater population density in Charlotte. So let's dial it in a little bit more. And what you can do is you can go to the current edition of RS Means and look up the city cost index for Columbia, South Carolina, which this year the data says it's about 88.9%, almost 89% of the national average for both labor and material costs. If you don't have access, or you don't want to buy the $300 or $400 RS Means book, you can look up the cost of living online as compared to the national average, and it'll get you pretty close to what this number is. But for consistency, we're going to use this number coming out of RS Means, and we're going to multiply that times the national median cost per space and per square foot, and I've done that. And again, this is for May of 25, when the final calculations for our 25 report were done. So if I take 88.9%, multiply it times 31,400 a space, I come up with a approximate cost to build a parking garage in Columbia, South Carolina of $27,915 per space, or $83.44 per square foot. So that is how you adjust it based on means. Now, next slide. If we wanted to, that implies that you'd build the garage, or that you were building the garage in May of 25. So what do you do if you're project is still a year out or a year off. So you'd have to take that number and inflate it to, whatever you think the bid time or the time when that price will be locked in, and that's a prognostication that it's only as good as your best guess. Historically, we've seen about 3.7% inflation annualized. As long as we've been tracking, or from when we started tracking this up to about 2020. Then, as Ray mentioned, we had that crazy jump of basically 25% over a 2-year period, and now we're back to about 4% annualized. So, just for conservatism, let's say we're going to use 4% inflation. So, if in a simplified example here, you were to anticipate that garage construction cost being locked in May of next year, we're gonna inflate the cost we came up on the previous slide by 4%, and so your anticipated construction cost next May for a garage in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm going to caveat that, and Ray's got a whole bunch more caveats to lay on you, but this is a median size garage, which is somewhere in that 500, 600 spaces, fairly straightforward, little architecture, but nothing fancy, nothing underground. That garage might cost you could budget that garage at just over $29,000 a space, or just under $87 a square foot.
Yeah, like Rob said, that's giving you, a fairly average garage, because that's what it's taken all of our data and averaging it all. So, and that is the true hard construction cost of the garage. We'll get into the soft costs here in a little bit later, but in our national average of size of garage is actually 686 is the national average, but this cost would work for garages in the 500 to 800 space range. If it gets a lot larger, it'll be a little bit more economical. If it gets a lot smaller, it can escalate. The normal cost per space or the cost per square foot can really escalate on you quickly. Also, it all depends on how efficient the garage is. If this is a garage, that's not part of any type of building that would be above it, and it's fairly efficient. The national efficiency is about 332 square feet per space. But now if this has a building up above and you got like short span construction, your efficiency can go really down, and that will escalate your costs significantly. So the layout of the garage is important. If it's all above grade and naturally ventilated, if it's not, there's a lot of things that can start driving up the cost. And it can be the facade on the exterior. It could be how much security and technology you're building into the parking garage. So there's a lot of factors that will sway this number up or down. And so you got to take those factors into play. I know every time we do a really early on stage estimate, we'll take our national average, and then we'll start either escalating or de-escalating, depending on what's going on. If the garage is small, or if it's got lots of things going on that complicates it, we'll create a premium for each of those items. And just give you an idea of what maybe an average precast garage would look like. Here's several photos of a precast garage with some decent architectural features. But these are just some examples that I felt like were in the average range. When you talk about, go ahead.
I was going to say those are the ones that land somewhere on our national median cost, or right around our national median cost. So,
yeah. Same can be said with cast in place PT garages. Same kind of thing. Take a fairly decent size and a fairly basic exterior facade to land around the national median. As you start to alter the size or alter the exterior finishes or what may be going on interior from a security technology standpoint, then that starts to raise it above the national median.
So what makes up the construction cost of a garage? You say, well, we're giving you sort of composite numbers, but what goes into those numbers? What makes up the cost of building a garage? Well, a garage is a fairly basic building. It doesn't have a whole lot of finishes typically on the interior. It's typically a concrete building, certainly concrete floors. Have seen one or two wood garages, but I don't think we haven't ever done one myself. But most garages are concrete. Might have they've got obviously striping on the floor and maybe some painted ceilings and maybe a little brick or a little architectural precast or some architectural metal on the outside. But there's no furniture. There's very little specialty equipment. So they're relatively straightforward structures. And when we cost garages, we use the Construction Specifications Institute format. There's a couple of reasons for that. First is that standard methodology for delivering a construction project, not just a garage project, but any construction project, is to use the CSI 50 division format to deliver not only the technical specifications, but also the front end specifications. And this is just a list of the typical technical specifications that we see in parking garage projects. As you can see, it's a relatively short list of technical specs, just again because there's not a whole lot of finishes and equipment and furniture and all that sort of stuff. Next slide. Another reason why we use the CSI format is because it's the standardized method of presenting costs on pay applications, and most contractors when they submit their AIA G702 and 703 backup, they will have broken things down generally in accordance with the CSI format: Division 3 concrete, Division 4 metals, Division 5 metals, Division 4 masonry, etc. So when we think about the individual pieces and parts, and the materials and whatnot involved in the labor involved in those individual pieces and parts, the biggest component of a parking garage project in terms of cost is obviously the structure itself. Again, because there's very little in the way of finishes typically, and the structural components, the concrete specifically, is probably going to make up 40 to 50% of the work, breaking down into the formwork, rebar, the ready mixed concrete, maybe precast concrete, depending on what you're doing, post tensioning systems, and then you'll have a little bit of masonry typically, and a little bit of metal work. Usually miscellaneous metals. Now, obviously there's exceptions to these rules. If you've got a really extensive hand laid brick facade on the garage, which we've done any number of times, that can add a fair amount to the cost, sometimes as much as 10 to 15%. And obviously if you've got the rare steel framed parking structure, or if you have a lot of ancillary steel structure that goes on the parking garage. For example, I've done a number of parking garages that have steel roofs on them, so that you can either get weather protection or add photovoltaic solar panels for on-site energy production. So that can bring up the cost too, but typically they're in the 2 to 3% range. We go to the next one. The durability components. This is another relatively small part, but important part, very, very important part of the parking construction cost. Durability components include the waterproofing, joint sealants, expansion joints, membranes, coatings, roofing, and all that sort of stuff. Very important stuff. Architecture. Typically we're looking at a little bit of curtain wall at the stairwells, in the elevator cores, maybe a little ground level storefront, probably a little storefront up at the interior side of the stair elevator lobbies on the top floor. A handful of man doors, maybe some overhead grills or rolling grills or rolling doors, depending on the security requirements of the facility. But it's usually a relatively small piece of the puzzle. And then finishes. And I'm talking about primarily about interior finishes, painting those ceilings, painting the walls, or excuse me, I should say staining the ceilings, because you don't want to put like a latex paint up there. The moisture will cause that to peel right off. But staining the ceilings or painting the columns and walls. A lot of garages opt not to do anything there, but it can be done, and it can really dress up the interior garage. But that can add up to 5% perhaps of the cost. The parking technology or parking specialty components, signage is usually pretty inexpensive these days. One of those typical aluminum signs will run you somewhere in the $300 to $400 installed, depending on the complexity of the installation. Maybe one of the clearance bars at the exterior might run you, I don't know, $3,500, $4,000 installed. So it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot. Parking technology again, especially these days with the frictionless or gateless operations that are in place. The technology investment in technology is, or the required investment in technology has really come down. In certain urban markets, it still makes a lot of sense to have gates and whatnot. But again, it's a small component of the overall cost. And keep in mind, this is the cost to install it, to purchase it and install it. This is not the software, the annual cost to own it and operate it, which all of these pieces of parking technology have, subscription requirements and updates and stuff. And then elevators, depending on the complexity and the type of elevators, they can add a couple percent to the exterior, or to the cost of the garage. Mechanical, plumbing, fire protection components, 3 to 5%. Again, a parking garage is a fairly simple type of building, but it does get a lot of exposure to moisture. So it's got to have a bunch of drains to pick up the floor drainage. There are fire protection requirements. Historically, parking garages open parking garages only needed dry standpipes, fire protection. But with the latest couple iterations of the building code, fire sprinklers are now required in many parking garages, those over 48,000 square feet in footprint. And that can add a fair amount. That can add a couple percent just themselves to the cost of the facility. HVAC, typically there's not a whole lot of HVAC in the garage. You probably have a handful of building support spaces that need to be conditioned, the electrical room, maybe a data closet, an elevator equipment room. But unless you've got occupied space, there's typically not much of an HVAC piece. And then in certain climates, you might consider snow melt systems. I know we're looking at one out in the Rocky Mountains that they're talking about doing a snow melt system for the whole roof of the garage. As far as the and that's looking like a $5 million commitment if they go that direction, just for that. Regarding the electrical components and low voltage pieces, somewhere in the 6 to 12%. The highest cost and highest load is the lighting. You got to have relatively intense lighting throughout. The nominally it's somewhere in that 4 to 5 foot candle range. It's not quite that simple, but it amounts to light fixtures about every 30 feet in each direction. Backup systems, not only for your emergency lighting, but could need them for your elevators, particularly if you have a tall garage that has standby power requirements for accessible ADA accessible egress. Car charging systems. Now that could be a whole topic of discussion, a whole presentation maybe on its own. Electric vehicle car charging, and there's a debate about whether that's appropriate to have in the garage. I know certain fire officials in certain communities are prohibiting electric vehicle charging in parking structures. Some are requiring that if they allow electric vehicle charging in the garage, they want it on the first floor or the first and second floor, or sometimes on the roof, because if a car catches on fire, heat goes up and it wouldn't damage, at least hypothetically, wouldn't damage the structure. But the electrical demands, each one of those car charging stations for a level 2 charger is 40 or 50 amp circuit. That can get pretty expensive pretty quickly, especially since they're dedicated circuits for each piece of equipment typically. But like I said, that's a whole nother conversation. And then the other low voltage systems are fairly typical and pretty limited. The civil components, when we talk about the civil components, everybody says, well, you're a civil engineer. Yeah, but when we talk about civil engineering in the building construction industry, we're talking about the earthwork and the below grade foundations and the utilities and that sort of thing. And those, have a nominal cost in that 5 to 10% range, depending on the complexity, depending on, if you have to move utilities. I know we've gotten into a few jobs where we have to move fiber optic cables to get foundations in, and that can get a little expensive, but somewhere in the 5 to 10% range is appropriate. And then last, move the slide forward one, right there it is. Last, you've got basically your contractor markup, overhead profit, mobilization costs, general conditions. When general conditions, that's your trailer and your porta-johns and the insurance, and every contractor, I think, buys a new pickup truck when they get a new job, so that goes in there, and then on top of that's whatever overhead and profit they've got budgeted in there. So those are the bits and pieces that make up what goes into the construction of a garage, with as I mentioned earlier, the structural system, in particular the concrete, making up the bulk of that.
All right, thanks, Rob. Well, that's a description of all the things that kind of go into what we would call the hard cost of the construction cost of the parking structure. Now, if you're wanting to get a feel for the overall project cost, if you're getting ready to build a parking garage, we've been talking about the hard costs, and there's a lot of soft cost that needs to be added in that kind of compromises the entire project budget. And the things that are part of the soft cost are like design fees. They're in that 4 to 8% range, depending on the size and complexity. The smaller it is, the higher you'll get closer to the 8%. And the larger the garage gets and less complex, you'll get closer to the 4% design fees. You've got material testing and special inspection that you need to account for. There will be real estate and financing costs that you may need to add in if you're purchasing the land. You've obviously got earned insurances, fees, taxes, and then the owner itself may have their own management fee to try to oversee the both the design and the construction of the garage. And then you got to build in a little bit of contingency of unforeseen things that happen either during design or during construction. So there's an owner contingency percentage that you would want to add, and that's kind of the 3 to 10% range. You want to add to your project at least a 3 to 10 to cover construction overrides or overruns. So drill down a little bit into the soft costs on when it comes to design fees. There's fees. You take that 4 to 8% and you'll divide that up about various disciplines. You have prime consultant, his portion, he's managing the project and he's your main point of contact. You've got the architectural design of the parking garage, and he's dealing with the facade and the stair towers and the code reviews and taking care of all of the life safety requirements, and he's detailing all the doors and stuff. Then you have the structural engineering, and that's all the things that keeps the structure up in the air. So the structural engineers, he's detailing foundations and slab on grade and superstructures and the roof, if there is a roof over your garage or roof over the stair towers or elevators. You've got the parking designers like us. We're laying out the garage and we're creating the architectural parking drawing sheets, and that kind of defines the layout of the garage and how you circulate both vertically and horizontally throughout the garage. Our fees will also cover the wayfinding and signage. And as Rob mentioned earlier, depending on the amount of technology in your garage or access and revenue control that you want, or if you're doing parking guidance like in a large airport garage, that would be part of our scope of work. And then as designers, being specialists in designing garages, we cover a lot of coordinating with the other trades and making sure that everything is well coordinated with all the structural elements and passes security. We also do drainage design and durability. I know Rob mentioned how important durability is in a parking garage, especially in the Midwest or northern climates. It's very important. And so there's also, as part of our parking design services, a lot of times we'll do the drainage and the durability design. And that's making sure all the water that gets either brought in or blown in rain, as it hits the floor, we're establishing how we're going to undulate the floor to get it to drain to the individual drains that we'll have located throughout the parking garage. We're also detailing all the waterproofing systems. That's sealers, sealants, expansion joints, that sort of thing. You got your MEP engineer, and his fees are covering designing all the electrical systems, lighting, communication, plumbing and HVAC and fire protection. Obviously, your civil engineer is doing all of the exterior conditions, all the site grading, drainage, you're doing stormwater, if you have stormwater management. He's obviously connecting all of the utilities that the garage is needed to all the local utilities, be it in the street or nearby. He's doing all the pavements, curbs, sidewalks, and that sort of thing. And then you have your landscape designer who's doing all of the hardscape and planting that goes around your parking garage. So as you kind of try to break it down, these obviously depend on the complexity of one item or another and what else going in the garage. If you've got a lot of HVAC and if it's an enclosed garage, so you got to ventilate the garage, then the MEP cost may be a little higher than normal. If you don't have a lot of landscaping going on, and those will drop a little bit. So these can fluctuate up and down a little bit depending on the complexity of the parking garage. But these are pretty good rules of thumb of how you would break down that 4 to 8% design cost. If you had to break it down by discipline, this was, rough order of magnitude of what the percentages would be for each discipline.
All right. So let's say hypothetically you've budgeted the hard construction cost for your parking garage project, and you've estimated the soft cost. A lot of times we'll say somewhere in the 20 to 25% range is what you should budget for soft costs. For all those things that Ray mentioned. But one thing that people forget sometimes is that after you've built the garage, after it's up and running, it costs money to operate. And it costs a fair amount of money to operate. Honestly, for a lot of operations, unless you're in one of the really, really big cities, where parking, lease rates and hourly revenue can offset your debt service, most garages or mini garages in many communities, you're really looking at offsetting just the operating and maintenance costs, and particularly for municipal garages, where there may be a field of dreams sort of, if we build it, they'll come sort of approach. You're looking at offsetting your debt service through tax increment financing, sales taxes, or whatever. So it is very expensive, or pretty expensive, to operate a garage, and that operations and maintenance expense can eat up all of your revenue, and that's not all that uncommon. So what are your operating and maintenance expenses? Utilities, obviously, electricity being the big one, because you got to keep the lights on. You got to run your elevator, and your HVAC to the extent that you have it. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff, and in particular, electric vehicle charging, which I sort of delved into a few minutes ago. But that can be a really heavy burden on the electrical system in the garage. Other things that you need, other types of utilities that you need network access. Typically, you can do a lot now with cell phone, in lieu of direct, hardline connect. But most efficient systems, or the most efficient way to do is typically to have a hardline network connection. You'll have some trash pickup. You'll have perhaps water and sewer charges, and so on. So yeah, the utilities are a big component of your operating costs. The next one, labor is a component of your operating costs as well. And I know most of you are thinking, well, gee whiz, when was the last time I saw somebody, operating a garage? When was the last time I saw somebody in a booth? The typical parking attendant person has more or less disappeared, except for maybe at airports. But there still is a requirement for staff. You have the management component. Somebody's got to oversee the overall operation of the facility, and if you have multiple facilities, maybe that's one person looking over several facilities. You've got housekeeping, janitorial type obligations. Typically, you're going to want to send somebody through a garage every day or two just to pick up the trash and stuff and keep it looking nice, so it's an attractive place for your customers and clients, and maybe sweeping it once every week or two and washing it down once every 6 months or so. You'll have even in an unmanned garage, you'll need to have somebody monitoring or available to talk about problems a client may have accessing the garage. Maybe if it's a gated garage, maybe their card's not working and letting them in. Maybe their toll tag's not letting them in the garage. Maybe I know at one point I had a device in a garage eat my credit card and wouldn't give it back to me. So that type of thing. Parking enforcement is critical, particularly when you have an ungated facility. That's a major part of the ungated operation. In order to keep people from stealing the parking spaces from you, you have to monitor who's in there and know who's supposed to be in there and who's paid, or who's allowed in there and who's not supposed to be in there, and deal with those folks that are in there improperly. And then obviously you have maintenance contracts or maintenance expenses on your systems, and if you have a valet operation, that adds a whole nother layer of staffing and staffing complexity to it. Other things that go into your operation, obviously, if you're a for-profit, you have a tax component. There's insurance. Always has to have, everything has to be insured, obviously. Fire systems and subscription services and monitoring and again, all the parking equipment these days has subscription fees associated with it. Software as a service. Snow removal, if you're up in the upper Midwest or the Northeast, that's or in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, that's a major component of any operation. And then just your annual wash downs and cleanings and stuff that maybe don't fall into the typical day-to-day janitorial aspect. So and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm not mentioning here. Just and every situation's a little unique, but these are the typical ones that we would expect to see. So what does that mean? That based on our latest greatest estimates, and we try to stay fairly up on this, and one of our consulting services is actually to do financial pro formas with respect to operating expense and to a certain extent revenue generation and whatever the net revenue would be based on operating expense. So we try to stay pretty current on this, and what we're seeing, and again, this is a national average. Where our utility costs are running somewhere in that $330 per space per year cost. The labor, most facilities are what we would consider to be unattended. And that doesn't mean that there's nobody there ever, but it does mean that there's not a permanent person there all the time, during operating hours. But labor has come down as a component of the overall operating costs, and we're somewhere in that $120 per space per year range. And then the additional expenses, taxes, insurance, fire systems, etc., somewhere in the $165 per space per year. And, some of that $165 would be something that you might escrow for capital, maintenance down the way. But it boils down to about 615 on average dollars per space per year for a parking garage to operate and maintain. And obviously that varies depending on where you are geographically, and what level of personnel you have associated with it, and also regarding maintenance and capital maintenance. If you're in an area that's got a very aggressive climate, lots of freezing and thawing, lots of salt usage, that would increase that number as well. Obviously, if you don't have a garage and you have a service lot, that's a whole nother. That's a much smaller cost, just because the costs associated with operating a surface lot are much smaller. But this is, as I said, every situation is unique. But this is a good budgeting number to think about as you're planning your garage project. And that is all the content we have for today. We're 40 something minutes in, so we're going to open it up to questions, if there are questions specific. Daniel, you'll have to.
Questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. We've already got a couple here queued up for you, Rob and Ray, and I'll read those off. Starting with Thomas, he has a question. Have you ever used the DOL CPI indexes to adjust area factors? If so, was it fairly accurate?
Short answer to that is no, but they, as I kind of alluded to in my slide about cost of living index, you can apply other indexes that are readily available online and get reasonably close. This is and again, there's nothing that we're not trying to say this is the absolute be all end all number that you absolutely have to use, but it's a jumping off point that then you can use to establish your budget, and there's nothing sacred about the means number if you want to use a different cost of living number. As far as adjusting our construction costs on a year-to-year basis, the ENR building cost index is more or less the industry standard for that aspect of it. What else you got, Daniel?
Santi wants to know, in the 2023 edition of the NFPA 88A, it says all new parking structures, including open and closed, must be fully protected with fire sprinklers. How much adoption of this edition have you seen across the country, and how do you see it impacting costs going forward?
So that's another great question. So far, I've seen very limited adoption of that NFPA requirement. I'm well aware of it. I'm a member of the National Parking Association's Parking Consultants Council, and we have Parking Consultants Council members who are actually on NFPA's 88A committee, and we're doing what we can to see if we can reverse that, because it seems like a pretty dramatic overstep of what the science would support in terms of combustibility, loss of property, loss of life, and parking structures. But it it is out there, and it's not likely to go away anytime soon. But fortunately, we haven't seen widespread adoption. In fact, even IBC 2021 came out with a requirement for garages over 48,000 square feet, requiring them to be fully sprinkled, regardless of whether they're open or not. And we're starting to see a few states, Florida being one of them, that has actually written that out of their local building code, to exempting open parking garages from that requirement. So there seems to be a little bit of pushback in that respect.
Robin, that 48,000 square foot limit, that's per floor plate?
That's a great question, Ray. That's the that's the implication in the code, but the way the language is written in IBC, it's a little vague. And I know of at least one fire official in a state that shall remain nameless, or in a community that shall remain nameless, was taking exception to the conventional wisdom that applies per floor.
Yeah.
They were saying that applies for the entire building. So that hopefully we don't see more fire officials like that, because that just adds complexity to it. As far as what the cost premium would be, I would say somewhere in the 3 to 5% range.
And then lastly, it says, Nico wanted to know, I know we talked a little bit about automation and how that affects the cost, but can you talk a little bit more about how automation could affect that median cost in garages moving forward?
Automation can mean a whole lot of different stuff. There are automated mechanical parking garages in some communities. There's a I don't know, something like 50 of them in operation in the U.S., somewhere in that range. There's also the concept of autonomous vehicle parking, and vehicles being able to park autonomously, and that's a whole different discussion. But the idea that the parking operation in general is becoming more automated, in the sense that there's less, you're having to interact less with individuals or pieces of equipment. I think that trend is going to continue to the point where everything is going to be very simple, or maybe not simple, but seamless in terms of finding a parking space, getting into a parking facility, whether that be a lot or a garage, paying for that. I think all of that is going to be automated and happen. A lot of it's going to happen in the background. There's already, the Google Maps and Waze and whatnot are already tied into some of these systems that tell you where parking is available and so on. So I think that aspect of automation is going to continue to blossom and just become ubiquitous, just become part of what we know and do. Like the cell phones that we now have that 20 years ago we couldn't have imagined. Autonomous vehicle parking, that's an interesting. I think vehicles are gaining more autonomy, and I think it's at some point they'll be able to park themselves to some degree, and that might mean that the space sizes can get smaller. You can dedicate maybe a little less space to the parking part of a development, or jam more cars in an existing garage. I don't think certainly not in my lifetime, probably not in my children's lifetime, my grandchildren's lifetime. I don't think cars are going to go away, or we're going to go to some sort of robot taxi model unless you live in the uber dense area. So parking facilities are still going to be a necessity. Ray, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I know that depending on the level of parking guidance you have in a parking garage, that can have a pretty decent effect on the overall cost. I know that wasn't the question, but there's different levels of parking guidance that you can have, either facility count or counting by level, or counting by zone, or even if you have the individual space counting type of systems and their red, green, blue lights. You'll see at airports and other large facilities. Those can have a pretty good impact. Rob, what are those high level parking guidance, individual guidance systems cost per space? Are they in that $400 to $600 a space range?
Yeah, probably a little bit more than that these days. I know we used to budget about $300 or $400 a space. I think the last couple times we've talked to some of our friends in the vendor business, I think those are running like $600-700 a space.
Okay.
The video based systems are they're a little bit more challenging to in terms of reliability and everything, but they give you some interesting options in terms of you know some interesting wrinkles in there, including the option to do double duty as a security system, and also when they're coupled with license plate recognition, they can find cars if you're in a really big airport parking area and you can't remember where you parked. You can potentially enter that in on your cell phone and tie into the system, and it can tell you, oh, your car's over here in this area. So there's some pretty cool things that can be done with that. But yeah, the main there's a couple really neat points about that. Those types of systems. First of all, they can drive occupancy up well above 90-95%, and traditionally about 85 at about 85% full. The garage would be perceived to be full, and people would turn around and leave. But with parking guidance, individual space parking guidance, you can drive that up 95-98% sometimes. Mm-hmm. It also eliminates reduces search time and eliminates idling and circulating. So it's not only is it a user convenience, it's also impacts has a positive impact on environmental sustainability. So yeah, good point there, Ray. What else we got, Daniel? I know we're out of time here.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we've got. You got everyone. If you have Rob and Ray's emails on that slide there that's visible. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to them directly. We're also going to send out the recording and some more information tomorrow. So stay tuned for that in your inbox. And we appreciate you joining.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.